Hey everybody, welcome back. Hey, I hope you're having an outstanding start to the new year. And here at Intrepid Exotics, we're starting off the new year by starting our second species spotlight series. And this is going to be on monitor lizards, probably my favorite group of animals on the planet. I just think they're amazing. And this specifically is going to be on Nile monitors. So I've got a lot of information to go into and kind of let everybody know how the series is going to unfold. And we're going to start going into a couple things about basic information about one of my favorite animals, the Nile monitor, when we come back on Intrepid Exotics. Whether you're a lifelong keeper or just getting started, help us encourage responsible keeping, conservation, and public education in the interest of keeping our reptiles safe and healthy as we protect them for future generations. You're invited to spend time with us as we experience these awesome animals together on Intrepid Exotics. Okay, so we're going to go over here in just a minute and we're going to interact with a juvenile to adult Nile monitor, kind of give everybody a look at what they are, how big they are, before we start going into more of the details about where they come from, how big they get, things of that nature. And a couple housekeeping things really quick before we get started with that. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to the USARK channel. I've always got the USARK, that's United States Association of Reptile Keepers. I always keep a link to their channel down in the description of all my videos. It's a really awesome organization. I'm not here trying to sell you membership. Go over, check out their YouTube channel. The link is down there. Take a look at it. Listen to some of the other keepers in the industry talk about what it is that they do and how important they are to the reptile community as a whole. Very important, something I really like to drive home as often as I can. I think in between all of these Nile monitor videos, I'm probably going to stop here in the next week or two and do a video just dedicated to USARK myself. I've got one video on their channel already, but I haven't really put a good one together for this channel. So I think that might be something that I sneak in between this series right here. And another thing, guys, you know, one of the reasons why I started these series, I've got one on reticulated pythons so far. This is the second one that we're doing on Nile monitors. And I'm kind of starting off with the most challenging reptiles and kind of working my way backwards. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is, for new keepers, it can be really difficult to get a good chunk of information, you know, kind of all in the same place to where it's comprehensive. And if it doesn't teach you everything that you need to know, it may at least inform you as to what questions you still need to ask or things that you need to look further into. Now, I don't, by any means, do I claim to be an authority on the subject, but I have kept these animals for a number of years, and I've got some personal experience to draw off of, and I've had some very fantastic, awesome mentors in this hobby, in this business, in keeping in general, that I've been able to lean on when I've had challenges with my animals. And if you keep these animals long enough, you're going to have challenges. You get a reticulated python or a Nile monitor, I guarantee you at some point you're going to have a challenge where you second guess yourself and want a second opinion. Now I'm going to do a singular episode about Nile monitors as pets. I know most folks will never ever get one, but I know there's some folks that are watching this because they're trying to figure out, man, there's this guy's got this Nile monitor really cheap. Is this something I should get? And we're going to do an episode on that specifically. There's some opinions on that. And I will tell you, there's one person who puts out a really good video about Nile monitors, and that's Clint Laidlaw with Clint's Reptiles. And this is what he has to say about Nile monitors.
If you are watching this video to try to determine if a Nile monitor is the right pet reptile for you, then it is definitely, with absolute certainty, not the right pet reptile for you.
And he's right. I'm going to say some really great things about this animal, but I definitely recommend that before you even consider getting one, not only do you wait till this whole series is out and pay attention to it, learn as much as you can on your own, make sure that you're going to have everything that you need, both time-wise, space-wise, material-wise, to care for these animals right, because they are tricky. So we're sitting down here with Niles now, and Niles, he's about 4 years old right now, and he's pushing about 5.5 feet or so. And as you can see, This is one of his normal poses. He's got a full bathtub in his enclosure here, so he's able to stay in there. So he spends a lot of time. Nile monitors really love their water, and they are very active. You'll see most of the time when I interact with him, you know, he's really chill, really mellow. I can come in here and mess with him, and if I need to, I can reach in, pull him out, and so forth. But you've really got to have a lot of respect for these animals. Nile monitors are notoriously a little bit edgier than a lot of the other ones, and a lot of it has to do, and this is the opinion I've heard before that really makes sense, with the fact that being a little bit smaller than Asian water monitors and say Kimodo dragons and so forth, croc monitors, and being an African monitor where he's in an environment naturally where there's more predators that he has to worry about, it's believed that that causes them to develop a little bit touchier, more reactive, more defensive personality, which can make them a little bit more difficult to socialize and work with sometimes. Now, make no mistake, as chill as he's being right now, this animal is extremely fast. If when it comes time, when we do the feeding episode, when it comes time to feed this fella, he will clear this enclosure in a blink of an eye. He can go from where he's at right now, jump out of this enclosure and take off if he wanted to, and it would be fun trying to stop him. I would get some pretty good scratches on me. So they're very athletic, and that's something to take into consideration too when we're talking enclosures in upcoming video. We've got to make sure that these guys get enough exercise, that they say, for instance, I seen this one person was keeping an Asian water monitor, and the enclosure was really small. The animal stayed in the same spot all the time, couldn't really move around, and it ended up dying. It got impacted and dying. If an animal can't move around as much as it's supposed to naturally, or at least a reasonable amount, then sometimes that can affect their ability to digest food and let their muscles deteriorate and things like that. Something we really want to avoid. Now, Nile's here in the summertime. I've got a harness for him, so him and I will go outside. He gets to run around in the yard, climb trees, swim in the creek. So he gets a lot of exercise in the summertime. Winters can be kind of dull for this poor fella, because it's too cold, of course, to go out here in North Carolina. But that being said, you've got to be really on point with these guys, because unlike a snake, when you take a snake out of the enclosure, typically once you turn off the food response, you're good. With this guy right here, his state of mind, something can get his attention and he can perk up immediately. And he can get a wild hair and decide he wants to test something out with his mouth, and if that just happens to be your finger, then you've got your hands full, because these guys can deliver a pretty nasty bite. And you can see his claws right here. I don't know how well you can see it, but these are no joke. And as you can see, he loves his water. These guys, him in particular, he stays in his water. He sleeps in it probably 90% of the time. Keep a heater on it, keep it right at about 80 degrees for him, and he absolutely loves it. I really think in a lot of ways being in the water is like a sense of security for these guys, because he seems a lot more comfortable when he's down there in the water as opposed to laying out in the open. Come on. Come on, buddy. There you go. Oh boy, look at you. There you go. And this will give you a little bit better idea of how big these guys get. Look at the tail on him. This tail is vicious. Yep, easy. And like I said, I'm not too big on forcing interactions with him, so we're going to go ahead and close him up and then go look at a couple other things. So now that we've had an opportunity to see one and kind of get hands-on with him a little bit, let's talk a little bit about where they come from and some things that are really important to know if you're ever considering getting a Nile monitor. Now, any of you guys that have followed my social media for any length of time have seen this picture. I saw this and I had to have it. Now, it's really funny because our impression generally of velociraptors comes from what you see here, from Jurassic Park, the 6-7 foot tall man-eaters. And in reality, velociraptors were significantly smaller and a little bit less menacing looking than that. They kind of looked like skinny chickens with really long legs, which makes monitor lizards much more close in size to velociraptors than they are to what they've actually descended from, which is believed to be mosasaurs. Mosasaurs were aquatic reptiles and much larger, and those are believed to be what Nile monitors, what Varanidae in general, descended from. Now, Nile monitors, as we said earlier, are African monitors. You can see here there's a really wide range from Central to Southern Africa, and their conservation status, as shown here in the center, they're not threatened with extinction, they're not vulnerable or anything. Their populations are really strong, they're really healthy, which is one of the reasons why it's really common to see wild-caught Nile monitors brought into the United States and sold. One reason why they're so cheap. But there's a couple downsides to having a wild-caught animal of any kind, and one of those is, first of all, anytime we have anything that we keep as a pet, it's always better to have captive breeding programs for them, because we don't want to get something popular in the pet trade, go out into the natural habitats and start scooping all these animals up, because that's when we start running into conservation issues. Another thing is, and this is something that you'll see with snakes a lot, you'll hear about the filial generations, F1, F2, F3. The longer an animal is, the more generations an animal is bred into captivity, the easier they are to socialize and the easier they are to work with. And wild-caught specimens of something like a Nile monitor can really be a challenge. Even if you're talking 1-2 generations away, it can still make a naturally kind of tricky animal even that much harder to work with. Plus, you've got the problem of introducing parasites and things like that into your collection, having additional health concerns and so forth with the animal when you bring them into captivity. Now, there have been some Nile monitors found in Florida. Just like with everything else in Florida, it just has the environment down there to support a lot of different species of animals. So it's why Florida is so susceptible to invasive species. And you can see a couple of locations here where those have been noticed. There's a couple cool slides I'd found here depicting Nile monitors. This Nile monitor skeleton here is from a museum site. So here was an interesting picture I found as well. And this scan actually depicts the teeth and everything on this animal really well. It looks much more menacing from this perspective than it does when you're just looking at him in person, where you just see the little bumps down there, and it's like you don't notice how big their teeth are until you get down and you actually look at them. So a quick size comparison here now. Nile monitors are the 4th largest monitor species. They fall in behind, of course, the Kimodo dragon, which is the largest, that falls in like 10 to 12 feet. Some specimens hitting over 200 pounds, just massive animals. Asian water monitors, they get a much larger body size. They get, stockier, and you're talking a 6-7 foot monitor lizard easy. Crocodile monitors are a little bit more slender. Those are known for their vicious mouths. Croc monitors have got, of all of the monitor species, I think they've got the largest teeth, and they are definitely not something that you want to tangle with. Now, crocodile monitors are fairly common with reptile keepers, because you can socialize those pretty well if you work with them, and avoid having any bad interactions with those massive teeth of theirs. And of course, the next size down is the Nile monitors, and we're looking generally 6 feet for one. Mine's 5.5 feet now. He's not fully matured. He's only 4 years old right now, so he's still young. I expect that, you know, over the course of the next couple years, he's going to continue to grow a little bit. He may end up hitting 6.5 feet, and then kind of starting to bulk out a little bit as time goes by. And then the next size down is the Australian Parenti. It's a little bit smaller than a Nile, but it's still the largest monitor lizard in Australia. It can be tricky for somebody that doesn't work with these animals to tell the difference. And I know Asian water monitors and Nile monitors look very similar. You know, you can pick out distinctions in their pattern, in their size. The easiest way, if you're looking at a monitor lizard trying to determine if it's an Asian water monitor or a Nile monitor, is by the placement of the nostrils. Asian water monitors' nostrils are going to be placed much closer to the snout, to the end of the snout rather. And Nile monitors, the nostrils are set further back, just about halfway in between the end of the snout and the eyes. And Niles, being an African lizard, they're going to have a little bit bulkier head, where Asian water monitors are going to be a little bit more streamlined. They're going to have a little bit thinner heads on them. So you can pick out the differences in them. Definitely, it's something that you want to consider if you're considering getting a monitor lizard, to make sure that you know exactly what you're getting, because you need to be prepared for the differences in size and temperament, and make a really good decision about which one of these you want to take in and work with. Now, we see a lot more people in the reptile community that are really getting into monitors. And there's, I mean, for good reason. Asian water monitors, Ackies, you know, some of these other monitors are just, they're really great pets if you've got space for them and so forth. You'll see some folks free roaming Asian water monitors 6 feet long in their house, and they're interacting with the other animals, with the humans in the house, and just kind of having run of the place. And they do really well. But there's a lot of cases too where you may get an animal that is wild caught, or maybe it's coming from a bad environment or something like that, where you're going to have a lot more difficulty getting that animal to socialize, and you've got to be a lot more careful when you're handling it. Nile monitors specifically, because just like we talked about before, they tend to be a little bit harder to socialize. Now, you've seen mine, you've seen that I can interact with him just fine, but I do exercise a fair amount of caution when I'm working with him, because he's not a puppy dog. You know, if he gets, like I said, if he gets a wild hair, he may decide he doesn't want to be messed with and take a pop at me. And so it's something that we've definitely got to be aware of. And it's no different than dealing with a dog. If you're dealing with a strange dog that you're not familiar with, you're not going to immediately get down on your hands and knees and get in its face and start playing with it. That's a really good way to get bit by a strange dog. And you've got to use that same level of common sense when we're talking about reptiles. You've got to treat that animal based on your familiarity with it, based on its temperament. And that's why we as keepers talk so much about really getting to know your animals, working to socialize them, being patient with them, and trying to keep them comfortable. Now, anytime you've got any kind of a big reptile, whether you're talking about a monitor lizard or a large constrictor, you've always got to be prepared for worst case scenario. And I say this about, you know, people wanting to get reticulated pythons, Burmese, rock pythons, anacondas, all of that stuff too. You know, your animal, once you get it, you're looking at some point, it's going to get 12, 14, 16, 18 feet long. And a well socialized animal can be really safe to work with, but everybody makes mistakes. You're going to make a mistake. The snake's going to make a mistake at some time. And all of us that have been keeping and interacting with a lot of animals, we've been bit at one point or another. So you've got to know what to expect, and you've got to know how to manage it. So we really, before I let anybody interact with my snakes, I'm telling them, you know, if this happens, this is what we do. And it's no different with monitor lizards. When you get bit by a snake, if it latches onto you, you don't pull away from it. You don't pull it off, because it's got those recurved teeth, and it's going to shred and rip the snake's teeth out, and they're going to stay embedded in you. It's a little bit different with monitor lizards because you're much less likely to get any monitor lizard teeth stuck in you because they're much smaller. But you do not, if it gets a hold of you, you do not under any circumstances want to try and pull away from it. The way I describe it to people is getting bit by a monitor lizard is kind of like having 4 hacksaw blades clamped around you. You know, you can take a hacksaw blade and you can set it on your arm and you can push down on it pretty hard and you're going to be fine. It'll leave a couple marks on there. But the second you drag that thing across, that's when it's going to cut in. So it's something to keep in mind when you're working with your monitor lizards, is that if and when they end up getting a hold of you at some point, you've got to wait for them to release. You know, you don't want to start inflicting pain on the animal. You don't want to start strangling it off or prying its mouth open. You're going to hurt it. You know, only in the most extreme circumstances would you do something like that. I mean, where you're legitimately looking at losing a finger or something like that. But if I was to go downstairs tonight, be working with Niles, and he gets a hold of me, I've just got to suck it up, wait for him to release. It's the best thing for him. It's the best thing for me in the long run. So I'm not really a big fan of bite videos. I think in a lot of cases it's just really bad PR for us. You know, if you're working with your animal and you get a mistaken food strike from your snake, your monitor lizard gets a hold of you or something like that, you know, that's not something that we want to be distributing and we want to be putting out there for the world. Yeah, it's bad PR for the entire reptile community. That being said, this isn't something that I'm putting out there for attention. This is meant strictly as an educational tool so that, you know, people can see when they're getting that small little Nile monitor, it's gonna grow up. And even if you've got a really good relationship with it, there is a chance you could get bit. So I think this is a really good thing to put out there in the right context. So let me play this video real quick. This is an adult Nile monitor. And I can say from personal experience that this hurts, but it doesn't hurt bad enough to make me squeal like that. But to each their own, I guess. But you can see, you know, this is probably a 6.5 foot lizard, and he's latched onto him. You can see 15 minutes later. This is what they do. When they get a hold of you, they will sit there and they will stay latched onto you. And the only thing you can do is wait it out, wait for him to release, and go on and lick your wounds. But one thing that you can see too is, I mean, you don't see any gashing and things like that on a guy. And that's because he's not pulling away. He's doing what you're supposed to do, and that's just wait it out. I remember my Nile, I went in too quickly one time, picked him up, put him on my shoulder, and he turned around and he got a hold of the back of my neck. And we sat like that for probably 3 to 5 minutes. It felt like 2 weeks. But all I could do was sit there. At the time, I think he was maybe 4.5, 5 feet long tops. But all I could do was sit there, wait it out, with a lizard stuck to the back of my neck, wait for him to let go. So, despite all the drama, despite all the howling and so forth, I mean, I think that should be a bit of an eye-opener for folks. You know, if you're looking at getting one of these lizards, there's a lot of great things about keeping them. Like I said, you can socialize them. They can be great to work with. The animal in that video, I highly doubt that was anybody's pet. They probably captured that thing on site and thought it was a good idea to go ahead and try this and just film it. But either way, whatever the intent was there, the intent here is to just show you what you need to be prepared to deal with if you decide to start keeping these animals. And it's just like anything else. If you get bit by one of your animals, it's your fault. We don't blame our animals if they do something like that. If you get bit by our snake, you did something wrong. You get bit by our lizard, we did something wrong. You know, I'm pretty cautious with Niles now that he's larger and he's bit before, so I do my best to make sure all of our interactions are nice and peaceful, doesn't stress him out, doesn't stress me out. And you've just got to be really patient when you work with these animals and give them space. Try not to impose yourself on them. make sure that you're not making that animal afraid of you, because as bad as the bite is from these guys, the tail, just like you seen earlier when he was getting back in the tub, that tail is solid, it's really powerful, and that's typically what they're going to use as their first weapon. So if your animal's out someplace and you start to approach and you scare it, they're going to flare up and you're going to see him cock that tail back. And I've been popped by his tail before. Last summer, had him in an unusual place where he was uncomfortable. Went to get him and he popped me in the side. Left a good foot-long welt on there. So yeah, it's just one of those things where, you know, we work with our animals in order to make them as easy to work with as possible. But this is one of the reasons why Nile monitors aren't for everybody, because this is one of those animals where you've got to be prepared for the worst case scenario. And if that's not something that you're going to be willing to deal with and not blame the animal for, and not become so afraid of the animal that you can't work with it anymore and it just sits there by itself and never gets touched, then definitely do not get any kind of a large monitor. There's smaller options for you, things that are going to be easier for you to work with. Again, these things can be great, but you've just got to be responsible. You've got to know exactly what you have, and you've got to know how to manage it. So we really covered a lot of ground on these guys. You know, I guess to kind of summarize my point here, monitor lizards, even Nile monitors, can be great pets. I love working with mine. I'm not afraid of him. He's not afraid of me. I'm still cautious. I'm still responsible with him. But he's a joy to work with. He really is. They're very intelligent animals. And this isn't in any way meant to dissuade a responsible keeper from adopting one, from working with it. They can be great. That being said, if you're not experienced and you're not prepared to engage in all of the interaction, all the time and everything that it takes to really calm and work with these animals, then definitely go for something a little easier. Now, we're going to be putting out more videos here in the future on this. I'm going to have one on enclosures, one on feeding, one on socializing. So we'll tack episodes onto this series as we go. But for right now, I think we've covered enough ground for an introduction. Again, guys, don't forget, like the videos, get down in the comments if you've got any questions, if you've got anything that you definitely want to see me cover in subsequent videos in this series, then let me know that as well. And get subscribed to the channel, get notified when new stuff comes out. And with that being said, you guys have an outstanding day. Don't forget to get on the USARK YouTube channel, get subscribed to that and follow it, get your membership if it all makes sense to you, which it should. And we will see you guys next time on Intrepid Exotics.